Lisa Marie Presley inherited the most famous name in American music. She spent a lifetime trying to be a person inside it. Norm Macdonald was funny, genuinely, stubbornly, uncommercially funny. The industry wasn't always sure what to do with that. Brian Wilson heard entire orchestras in his head and tried to put them on tape. What it took out of him is a different story than what it gave the world. Sidney Poitier walked through doors that weren't built for him and made it look like dignity. Michael Gambon played kings, wizards, broken men. 50 years of inhabiting other people's words with total conviction. Loretta Lynn built an entire mythology out of cold country and hard truth, and carried it every single day of her public life. There is a moment in the production of a film called Ballers, the HBO series that ran for 5 seasons, where Dwayne Johnson plays Spencer Strasmore, a former NFL player, navigating the gap between who the world thinks you are and what it actually costs to be that person. The irony is almost too clean, because that is precisely the tension that has defined Johnson's real life. Not a character's fictional arc, but his own. By the time Ballers premiered in 2015, Dwayne Johnson had already built one of the most recognizable public images in American entertainment. The muscles, the eyebrow, the relentless positivity, the workout posts at 4 in the morning. The brand. But a brand is a managed surface, and the work that sits underneath that surface, the actual grinding, the failure, the cost, is a different story. Start there. Start with the work, because the work is where the truth lives. In the mid-2000s, Johnson made a deliberate and, at the time, genuinely risky decision to leave professional wrestling and pursue Hollywood full-time. This was not a given. The graveyard of wrestlers turned actors is long and well documented. Hulk Hogan had tried. Roddy Piper had tried. Even Steve Austin had limited reach. The conventional wisdom in Hollywood, spoken quietly in rooms Johnson was not yet invited into, was that wrestling fame was regional, televised, and fundamentally a different register than cinematic stardom. Johnson's first significant test was The Scorpion King in 2002, a Universal Pictures production where he headlined for the first time. He was paid, by reported accounts, $8 million, at the time a record for a first-time lead. The film made money, but it was not the kind of critical reception that signals a durable career. Johnson knew that. In interviews from the period, he acknowledged the gap between commercial performance and being taken seriously as an actor, and he began making choices accordingly. What followed was a stretch of mid-2000s films that were, to put it plainly, not good. The Rundown, Walking Tall, Doom, Gridiron Gang. Some had moments, most underperformed relative to his star power. This is the part of his story that gets compressed in retrospective profiles, where everything is framed as an inevitable ascent. It was not inevitable. There were years where the question of whether he could actually carry a major Hollywood film remained genuinely open. The pivot came with Fast Five in 2011. Justin Lin's decision to cast Johnson as DSS agent Luke Hobbs against Vin Diesel was the moment the franchise changed gear, and it was also the moment Johnson's career repositioned itself. He was not the lead of that film. He was the adversary, the disruptor, the presence that raised the stakes. And that restraint, accepting a supporting antagonist role in someone else's franchise turned out to be the shrewder move. Fast 5 grossed over $600 million worldwide. Johnson's presence was credited by critics and industry observers alike as a significant factor in the film's energy. From there, the math changed. The franchise expanded. His role expanded. By Fast and Furious 6 and beyond, he was a co-lead. The trajectory that followed, Central Intelligence, Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, Jungle Cruise, the Fast and Furious extensions, built what Forbes repeatedly ranked as one of the highest-paid actor profiles in Hollywood. For several years running, he held the #1 spot. But the Forbes number is a clean headline. The actual production schedule that generated it is something else. Johnson has spoken in interviews, more candidly than most stars of his level, about the physical cost of his output. He has described training before sunrise, regardless of filming schedule, managing injuries, including a pec tear he documented publicly, and operating under a degree of self-imposed pressure that is not dictated by studios, but by his own internal standard. In a 2019 interview with Oprah Winfrey, he discussed depression, not in passing, not as a rehabilitated talking point, but with a directness that was notable precisely because it cut against the motivational image he projects on social media. He described experiencing depression at multiple points in his life. First, following a knee injury that ended his brief college football career and derailed an initial NFL ambition. Again, after his first marriage ended, and in a period following his mother's suicide attempt when he was 15. He has been public about that last event specifically. His mother, Atta Johnson, walked into traffic on Interstate 65 in Nashville in 1988. He has described being in the car, has described pulling her back, has described the silence that followed in the years before he understood what he had witnessed. This is not background texture, this is the architecture, the drive, the volume, the relentless output. They do not emerge from nothing. They emerge from a specific history of instability, relocation, and the particular pressure of growing up in a household shaped by financial crisis and the weight of a family that had already built something in professional wrestling that he would need to either match or transcend. His father, Rocky Johnson, was a trailblazer, one of the first black men to hold a significant title in the WWF. Rocky Johnson competed in an era when that accomplishment carried a different kind of freight than it would now. His grandfather, Peter Maivia, was a Samoan wrestling legend. The lineage was real and documented, and for Dwayne Johnson, both a resource and a pressure point. He walked into professional wrestling not with the cushion of nepotism, but with the specific burden of a name that people already held an opinion about. His first major singles push in the WWF in the mid-1990s as Rocky Maivia, a babyface character modeled on his family legacy, was rejected by crowds almost immediately. Fans began chanting, "Die, Rocky, die," at live events. He has recalled this in interviews with a clarity that does not soften the experience. This was not a minor setback. In professional wrestling, crowd rejection is immediate, public, and loud. The reinvention was tactical and complete. He turned heel, became The Rock, developed a character rooted in arrogance and precision, and a verbally sophisticated promo style that the industry had rarely seen at that level. The catchphrases were not accidents. They were crafted. The eyebrow raise was performative and deliberate. He studied what worked and engineered it. By the late 1990 seconds and into the early 2000 seconds, The Rock was one of the 2 or 3 biggest names in the WWF and later WWE. His rivalry with Steve Austin across multiple WrestleMania events was treated by industry analysts as among the most commercially productive feuds in professional wrestling's history. His in-ring work was technically competent, but his real gift was character and language, the ability to make a live arena feel like a conversation he was having with each individual member of it. He left the full-time WWE roster in 2004. He returned periodically, most notably for a high-profile feud with John Cena that culminated at WrestleMania 28 in 2012, billed as Once in a Lifetime. The match drew significant pay-per-view numbers. He returned again in 2024 as a villain character, a creative decision that was discussed in trade coverage as a deliberate inversion of his usual public image. The fact that he could still walk into that arena and command it, 20-plus years after his initial run, says something about the durability of what he built there. But durability in public image is not the same thing as ease in private. His first marriage to Dany Garcia ended in 2008. The two have spoken publicly and with apparent sincerity about the fact that they rebuilt a working relationship after the divorce, one in which Garcia became his manager and a producing partner through their shared company, $7 Productions. This is an unusual arrangement by any standard. It is also a documented one. The business relationship is public record. Their joint projects are credited, and both have discussed it in interviews without apparent acrimony. What drove the end of the marriage is not something either has detailed extensively, and that gap deserves to be left where it is. $7 Productions, named for the $7 Johnson reportedly had in his pocket at a low point after being cut from the Canadian Football League, has become a legitimately significant production entity. Films, television, the Young Rock biographical series on NBC, and a range of development projects have run through it. The company has given Johnson a degree of creative control that most actors working at his volume do not have. Young Rock, which aired from 2021, is worth examining not just as a project, but as a choice. The show dramatized his upbringing, the financial instability, the moving, his father's career, the wrestling world he grew up around. It is, in a meaningful sense, a public act of narration. He chose what to show and how to frame it. That selective disclosure is itself a statement about the gap between biography and brand. His second marriage is to Lauren Hashian, with whom he has 2 daughters. He has a daughter from his first marriage, Simone, who has pursued professional wrestling and signed with WWE, a generational continuation of the family line that is documented and publicly reported. He has spoken about family in the generous but carefully bounded way that most stars of his level manage. In 2023, his tequila brand, Terramana, which he launched in 2020, was reported as one of the fastest-growing spirits brands in the country. His nutrition supplement company, Zoa Energy, similarly expanded. The business architecture around his public image is substantial and deliberate. None of it is accidental. There is also the political chapter, or near chapter. In 2021, a poll by PeopleSay suggested that 46% of Americans would support a Dwayne Johnson presidential run. He addressed this in multiple interviews, sometimes with apparent seriousness, sometimes with deflection. He has stated publicly that he takes the idea seriously as a responsibility, that he would not enter politics without believing he could do it with intention. He has not entered politics. That is where the record stands. In 2022, his public dispute with Vin Diesel over the Fast and Furious franchise became something more than trade gossip. Diesel stated publicly that he had used tough love to get a better performance out of Johnson during production of Fast 8. Johnson's response, described in multiple published reports, was that Diesel's characterization was inaccurate and that he found it disrespectful. Johnson subsequently confirmed that his character Hobbs would not be returning to the main Fast and Furious franchise films. The specifics of the interpersonal dynamic are not fully documented, but the professional separation is. What is worth sitting with is this: a man who has built an entire public persona around invulnerability, positivity, and controlled strength, found himself in a public conflict that he chose not to absorb quietly. That is a small thing, maybe, but it is a more human thing than the brand usually permits. He turned 50 in 2022. He marked it publicly, as he marks most things. The milestone was accompanied by the usual retrospective media coverage, the usual metrics: box office, Forbes rankings, follower counts, brand valuation. Those numbers are not nothing. They are the external evidence of what a specific kind of relentless, injury-sustained, strategically managed career can produce. But the more interesting question, the one that sits beneath the metrics, is what it costs to be a symbol. Lisa Marie Presley knew that weight. Loretta Lynn built something from nothing and carried the myth of it for decades. Brian Wilson made masterpieces and paid for them in ways that were not visible on the album covers. Sidney Poitier walked through doors that were barely open and made it look like grace. Norman MacDonald worked with a kind of integrity that the industry rewarded unevenly. Michael Gambon inhabited other people's words for 50 years and made it seem effortless. These are not the same story as Dwayne Johnson's, but they are all, in different registers, stories about the gap between what the public receives and what the person sustains. Johnson has not yet written his final chapter. He continues to produce, to perform, to build. The machine runs. What the machine requires of the person inside it, that is the part that will take time to fully understand. He has offered partial glimpses: the depression conversations, the family history, the early failures, the physical toll he documents in gym footage that is simultaneously a genuine habit and a public performance. At this point in his life, the question is not whether Dwayne Johnson succeeded. That is settled. The question is what kind of story the success turns out to have been, and whether, in the years ahead, he gets to write more of it on his own terms. That story is still in progress.